we're taking you to Glasgow, where we'll be looking at COP26, a conference of the parties, and of course, Zambia participating in there. And speaking about that, let's perhaps get straight into it, because COP26, a global United Nations summit on climate change that has been held and is currently on to find out how countries are planning to tackle climate change effects. We're talking about global changes in the Earth's average temperature. The Earth's average temperature moves up and down naturally, but has been increasing more rapidly following industrialization. Zambia is being represented by many a stakeholder, and among them is Dr. Alik Muvundika, who's a Principal Scientific Officer, National Institute for Scientific and Industrial Research, and joins us from Glasgow via Zoom. Thank you for being with us. Perhaps let's get straight to finding out how things have been so far there. Doc?
Thank you, Franklin, for having me.
Your work and expectations is to contribute to the target of ending emissions by 2030. Industrialized nations, well, they admit they have a lot of work to do. What has Zambia's participation done? How significant is its contribution to being there?
Well, basically we're here to agree on the rule book for the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015. And the Paris Agreement's target is to reduce global warming to 2 degrees and also pursue efforts to reduce it further to 1.5 degrees. And so to do that, all countries are expected to contribute to emission reductions. And this includes developing countries like Zambia. So in our NDC, what we call nationally determined contributions, we've got a target of reducing emissions by 2030 up to a tune of 38,000 gigagrams of carbon dioxide. And so that's our target for 2030, but various countries have got different targets. So really the main goal of the Paris Agreement is to reduce the global warming to 2 degrees and pursue efforts to 1.5 by the end of this century. In order to do that,
right, various
countries have made pledges, more especially developed countries. They have to help developing countries achieve their targets. So in our case, in our what we call our NDC, we made a commitment that will reduce our emissions by 25% based on business as usual, but also up to 47% if we get support from developed countries. So that's the whole arrangement of the Paris Agreement, and that's why we are here, to really agree on the rules of how we are going to achieve these targets.
One may want to find out what the actual situation is for Zambia. What is Zambia is pledging to help reduce emissions by 47%. How badly affected is this country, or is this figure a regional figure? Is it about Zambia or the region, this effort to reduce by 47%?
Well, global warming is a global thing, as the name suggests. So emissions that are emitted in South Africa will not affect South Africa, it will affect everyone. The atmosphere knows no boundaries. So even the few emissions that will also emit as Zambia will affect other countries. Suffice to say that as a country, our emissions are still low, but the trend is on the rise. And most of our emissions are actually coming from land use, which is the forestry, the energy. We see a lot of charcoal burning around, and those are the major emitters, contribution to our emissions. And so for us to really contribute effectively, we need assistance because you can't just tell people to stop cutting or producing firewood without providing an alternative. So we are here actually to lobby for support to ramp up our green energy so that people can stop cutting firewood we need to provide that alternative. And for us to do that, we need support from developed countries because it's their obligation under the convention. They first of all contributed to this crisis that we're in. And so they are responsible to take a lead in helping developing countries such as ours.
What are these alternatives? The alternatives may not be uniform. So you take, for example, ask people to stop cutting trees. What alternatives are on the table?
Well, there are various alternatives, such as erecting PVC, the solar, wind. Those are the major alternatives that are on the table.
That is just for Zambia? You're speaking specifically for Zambia? In terms of
that is for Zambia and many other developing countries. Yes, yes.
Our thoughts that the world is bearing the brunt of the much more progressive countries. You had yesterday Zambia and rather the US and China agreeing, and this made kind of global headline news. How much commitment are you hearing? Yes, apart from the statements. And what impact do you think it will have if these big nations really commit to this cause?
Well, frankly, the success of this COP26 lies basically on one issue, one technical issue, and that is us agreeing on what we call Article 6. As you are aware, the Paris Agreement has got 29 articles. All these articles were agreed in, I think, the last COP, except one article, which is Article 6. And this is what we call the market and non-market mechanisms. This really is very important because that's where the private sector comes in. The participation of the private sector in reducing emissions will come in under this article. So there hasn't been agreement on this article, and the success of this COP really hinges on us agreeing on this article. And as I speak now, the ministers, because we finished our technical negotiations last week, we could not reach consensus, and so we forwarded our text to the political level for our ministers. And as of yesterday, there was still 3 crunch issues which have not yet been agreed. I'll be a bit technical. The first one is what we call the share of proceeds. This, in simple language, is resources that has to go to the adaptation fund to help countries like ours who are adversely affected by climate change for projects that are undertaken in developing countries aimed at reducing emission reductions. And so agreement on this one has not been agreed, even at the political level. The second one is regarding the units and projects that were undertaken under the Kyoto Protocol or the pre-2020 regime, whether these projects and units that were generated should be transferred to the Paris Agreement regime. There's a lot of debate on this one. Most countries are saying, especially the Brazilians are saying, we invested so much, so we need these to be transferred. But then there's an argument that if these units are transferred, then the ambition will be compromised. Us reaching the target of 2 degrees by the end of this century will not be achieved because then you are pumping a lot of units of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere using the units that were generated under the Kyoto Protocol, which has got a lot of question marks. So we are hoping this could be resolved this evening before the conference closes tomorrow. Well,
we will follow it up with you. It's interesting that you still have to convince each other. But what for you will be the biggest takeaway from this conference?
Well, the biggest takeaway really is that Zambia has, scored, in that the region has recognized us by electing us to be the chair of the African Group of Negotiators. And this really shows the goodwill, I think, shown by His Excellency, who came to give us support as negotiators, as well as the minister who has been here with us. He just left yesterday. We've been with him for the past 2 weeks. And so their presence showed the region that Zambia is taking the climate change issue seriously, and to that effect, we were elected for the next 2 years to represent the African continent as chair of the African Group of Negotiators, which is a big plus for us.
Well, that's really, really good to hear, and thank you for saying it on the update. We'll hear from you soon. Very best of luck.
Thank you very much, Franklin.
Dr. Alika Muvundika, Principal Scientific Officer, National Institute for Scientific and Industrial Research there, talking to us from Glasgow, where he's at the COP 26. Stay with us. You're watching The Update.